I didn't want to just know the names of things. I remember really wanting to know how it all worked.
Look for the silver lining whenever a cloud appears in the blue.
Welcome to the show, Aarushi.
Thank you.
So, tell me, how's India treating you?
India has been great. I was really looking forward to seeing Mumbai in the rains, and I'm glad that I can do that.
And congratulations on graduating from Stanford.
Thank you.
How does it feel?
Still a little unreal. I'm glad to be on a break again because the last year and the last quarter was a little bit hectic, just wrapping things up. And I start work in 2 months, so there's a little bit of, I guess, preparation to be done for that. But I'm in the middle, I guess, now. And so that's...
So, you head back to Seattle in a couple of months?
I do. I head to Seattle to work at Microsoft as a software engineer.
Well, congratulations on that. And welcome to the show again. This is about women in science, this series, especially women in STEM. And I know you are a STEM graduate.
Yes.
So let's begin. When did your interest in STEM come into being? When did you start really thinking or believing that this is what your career path is going to be?
Sure. So I've been interested in maths and physics, particularly almost my whole life.
Mhm.
I think even in elementary school, middle school, high school, those were some of my favorite subjects. And interestingly enough, I also had a huge interest in the humanities. So I loved history a lot. I loved English a lot. And so I was always slightly torn between whether I should pursue STEM or the humanities.
Mhm.
And I think a turning point was in the 9th grade when I joined a robotics team. And that's when I really decided that I enjoyed STEM, yes, but I also wanted to do it because I was the only girl on a team of like 15 other guys.
Mhm.
And that was a very interesting experience for me. And initially, it was not very welcoming at all. And I kind of wanted to run away. But I think I wanted to stand my ground, and I wanted to, again, I was super interested in construction and programming. And so I think that's why I stayed.
Okay, let's just hold on to that. Why why did you feel that it was not welcoming enough for you?
I think at that age, with like 14, 15-year-olds, a lot of times people don't realize when they're like, or they're not trying to consciously be welcoming to someone. So a lot of the inside jokes were like very typical, I guess, male humor, or that's what they would call it.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't always welcoming. I was also the only one with no programming background. And
Mhm.
so I had to learn everything from scratch, whereas a lot of them had already been in robotics. In fact, all of them had been in robotics for like a few years at least. So they knew each other before, they knew robotics before. And so I think it was a combination of those things.
Talk me through that entire robotics journey when you started off.
So I started off being when I started off, I was interested in math and physics. And a lot of the challenge was to do with like physics, like using projectile motion to like figure out trajectories of things. And so I thought that it would be a good fit for me.
Mhm.
I personally wasn't very interested in programming at the very beginning because I didn't know it. And so I think what I didn't know was especially intimidating to me because other people did know. Um, but eventually, I think it didn't happen the first year, but after the second year, I was increasingly more confident in my abilities and my, I guess, right to be on that team as a contributing member of it.
Mhm.
And so I think that really inspired my interest and made me want to further my knowledge in programming, in construction, in, I guess, those STEM fields specifically.
I want to go back to that. the question I asked you, and I think it's something which is being debated and discussed a lot, which is the gender gaps, especially in STEM. And do you feel that men can be allies in STEM, or do you feel there's a lot that needs to be done?
I would just want to ask you what your definition of an ally would be.
So the way I look at men being allies is support, work as a team, celebrate accomplishments, and always stand up when you need to.
I think from my perspective, um, that would probably be what most people would consider being an ally. I might go one step further to think that there needs to be active involvement, even when the situation does not present itself. And by that, I mean like active campaigning or active, I guess, pushing for reforms that cater to more women in STEM.
But don't you feel that you also need to do that yourself rather than expecting someone else to do for you?
Of course. I think that women should be doing that as well. But I think that if men want to consider themselves allies, then it cannot be passive statements of women
Sure.
yeah, I think that's what.
So coming back to STEM, Aarushi, you got into Stanford. It's a 4-year program. Talk us through your experience at Stanford.
When I got into Stanford, I knew that I was going to do some form of STEM, possibly computer science, because I had already enjoyed it so much previously. And so I think in that sense, while a lot of my peers were confused about which major to choose, it was relatively easy for me because I had gone in half decided, and all my introduction classes were taught by extremely enthusiastic and charismatic professors. And I think that just really sealed the deal on what I would be studying. Come sophomore year, actually come freshman year, we had the pandemic in the winter of my freshman year.
Yes.
So I effectively got maybe 5-6 months, and then I was back home in Mumbai, quarantined for a year and a half after that.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that. Yes. Go ahead.
So that experience was a little difficult because I tried to do online school, but while it worked for a lot of people, the time zones just did not work out for me. And it was extremely difficult to have to do group projects or office hours at 3 a.m. in the morning. And so I think, so what I decided to do then for the next year was to intern at a company in Mumbai itself. And that was also a tech startup, a fintech startup. And so that's what I did for the next year. And once I went back to Stanford, junior year and senior year were pretty much, again, computer science and a lot of other classes that like piqued my interest. So I did nonfiction creative writing, I did improv, I did social dance. So
And that was all a part of your program, or this was outside of?
this was outside. So the way it works is that you have to complete 100 units. It's different for every major, but for computer science, it was 100 units of specified courses and then also optional courses within like a given specialization. And the one that I chose was artificial intelligence. Some of the other ones that were available were systems, information theory, theoretical track. And so, again, the one I chose was AI.
There's a lot of debate about AI and how it would probably impact the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Obviously, I think that the impact is going to be huge. It's going to be maybe the equivalent of like the internet age, that kind of change. I also think that it's interesting because I've been majoring in AI for 4 years now, but a lot of conversation around it started specifically this year after, I guess, ChatGPT like blew up, became viral. And so that's something I find interesting. I guess what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the top scientists and experts in the field were asking these same questions before ChatGPT blew up and had no answers. And then it did blow up, and I guess everyone is asking those questions, but there are still no concrete answers.
Don't you feel that every new technology which has come in right from the internet days back in the mid 90s, there were always concerns about how it would turn out to be and how it could probably be counterproductive to mankind? But on the contrary, it's actually been productive, super productive, I would say, for everyone.
Sure. I do think that is the case, especially with AI.
Yes.
And having, again, studied the field, I think a lot of people are like blindly scared. And I think that's not necessarily required.
Especially in the healthcare industry, right?
Right. Because I think that there are lots of benefits that it can have. But I do think that those concerns are extremely valid because even with the internet, I actually had a class just last quarter called Trust and Safety, and it sort of uncovered the dark side of the internet and everything people do to abuse these technologies. So basically, things that the technology was not meant to do, but people have kind of found a loophole to like.
But you will always find those fringe groups, right? I mean, if you look at social media, there is always a dark side to it.
Right.
I want to ask you a little bit more about AI and just walk me through what programs you had pertaining to AI in your curriculum. What are the topics you covered, just from a perspective of people to understand, how or what are the opportunities out there?
So the first class that I did was Introduction to AI, which was basically a brief overview of, again, what all the fields within AI are, what some algorithms used are, what some, I guess, use cases might be. And having, I guess, gotten that map, then the options were varied. So another class that I took was deep learning, which is, I guess, one branch that you could take from there. A second branch would be natural language processing, which is another class that I took. And a third branch would be, I guess, vision processing, which is another class that I took.
So, Aarushi, from the time you got into Stanford and the 4 years, of course, I'm going to touch upon that 1.5 years where you were working or studying online. But are you happy with what you've achieved? Are you happy where you are at this point in time? Do you feel you could have done something different?
I think those are not mutually exclusive. I am happy with where I am right now. I definitely think I could have done things differently. And like you mentioned, especially because of COVID, there's a lot of what ifs. What if I had done something else? What if I came out of COVID differently? So I guess those questions will always remain. But, and I haven't stuck 100% true to what I initially went in with, which was to, I guess, get a master's and then have a startup. What I have done instead is that I am deferring a master's for a year at least, and then I'll take a call after that. And I'm going to work at a company which I enjoyed interning at. So yes, I'm happy.
Going back to what you just said, what would you have done differently?
It's not so much what I would have done differently as it's what some of my relationships would have looked like with friends had COVID not happened, or what my college experience in general would have been like had it been a normal one. But again, I think I'm very glad for the friends that I came out with, and I'm glad for the position that I am in now.
So, Aarushi, this year's International Day for Women and Girls in Science are celebrated on the theme of innovate, demonstrate, elevate, advance. What are your thoughts on each one of them?
I think the point of all of these themes in general is to celebrate not just women in general, because a lot of times when you do that, it might get unfocused or you kind of lose what it actually means. And so I think that celebrating women innovators or women that have done each of these four things is important because it provides that specificity that kind of just highlights the actual accomplishments in that field. And I think there have been so many women innovators and pioneers, like historically, but even just in like daily life, like I'm sure, like even if you think about it, like your mom or like any women in your family, like there's some form of innovation that they do not get credit for that they do in their daily life. And of course, like historically would be like Marie Curie or Ada Lovelace, the first programmer, was actually a woman. Grace Hopper, all these names. And just in general, there are so many like unsung heroes, like I said, and these advancements have been made through them. And so I think it's just important to recognize that.
I personally feel that some of these, while they are very important, to have a Women's Day, a Men's Day, a Women in Science Day, unless we actually walk the talk, I don't see results happening. Do you agree to that?
Sure, yes, I do think so. But I think that it's still it's not useless to have those days.
So women make up about 28% of the workforce in STEM. And as always, men outnumber women. And of course, one of the important reason is gender gaps, especially in high-paying jobs, right? Um, and the excuses given are far too many. I'll share with you some of the excuses or reasons as outlined through research and people. Your thoughts on that? First and foremost, can't lead the pack.
I think obviously that's not true. And I think it's again a stereotype that perpetuates the issue.
We have far too many women leaders now. So I think that excuse.
And still not enough.
Can't do longer shifts.
Again, that in my experience, that's not true. I have, again, a lot of women in my family who just disprove that. My aunt is a doctor and her shifts are extremely long and erratic. My mom has had, she's a startup founder, in fact, now. And her startup requires a lot of her time and attention. And she's doing some amazing work, but it's, again, a very difficult job. So I just think, yeah, that's untrue.
And the most, I think this one got the highest number of votes as far as excuses or reasons are concerned. No work-life balance.
I think that stems from a lot of patriarchal perspectives. I think it stems from historically perpetuated stereotypes. And again, that is not true. And I think that, in fact, that thought process should be changed. And yeah, I think unfair expectations is definitely one of the biggest problems, especially for that last excuse that you mentioned. Something else I think, a statistic that I read up and I found interesting was that even of the women that major in STEM, a fraction, maybe a fifth of those actually go on to work in those fields. And so not only is there a gap from like, I guess, school education to higher education, but there's also like a huge gap from higher education to, I guess, just working in the field. And there's a lot to be said about why.
Question for you as you enter the workforce. How do you think we can overcome these gender biases from your perspective, from the time someone is being hired?
Again, I'm not sure that I have all the answers.
None of us have, Aarushi.
Right. I think that it's important to recognize and be aware of the issue in a way that is not performative. I think, as you said, male allyship is important, and so is women working towards, I guess, being even just personally. So I have to tell myself to be more assertive when I'm in a room with people and I know what I'm talking about. But I have to keep reminding myself that I need to just be assertive and like speak my mind.
Do you also think that the wage gap is a big challenge?
I think it is a challenge. And again, it is deeply unfair and biased. And those are just massive systems, which I'm not sure how one would go about reforming, but they do need to be reformed.
I was reading this very interesting research report, and it says, and I totally believe in it. I want your take on it. Anonymizing CVs in the recruitment process. Do you feel that's a good first step? Do you think that's a good step at all?
I think that that is a step.
Hmm.
The issue is, at least from, again, personal experience, that's all I can speak to, is that a lot of times with technical interviews for internships, you have video calls and you have like programming in front of like actual interviewers. And so if they do hold any prejudices, then those probably can't be avoided through just that. But I do think that like anonymizing CVs would just make the first filter, I guess, wider.
This used to happen, I think, especially in the US, early 60s and 70s, where Samantha Jackson would be S. Jackson.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you this question, and this is not specific to a male or a female. How do you think we can make STEM interesting to a child from a very young age?
I think that children already have a lot of curiosity about how things work. A lot of that curiosity is extremely scientific in nature. A lot of the answers that children get like intrigued by, like why is the sky blue, stuff like that, all has like a lot of science behind it, even stuff that I've like learned in college. But so I think that the main problem is not to get them interested, it's to keep them interested, one. And two is to prevent any things that might be detrimental to their interest. So for example, some of the stereotypes that you mentioned, so to like prevent girls, for example, from being discouraged to keep studying STEM. Or I guess people perpetuating the stereotype that girls are bad at math. So that's an example of, I think, a harmful stereotype that prevents younger children from, I guess, pursuing something that they think they will be bad at. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense.
I also feel stimulating the curiosity of a child very early. Don't you feel that arts too play a big role in this? Any kind of artistic interest can also help you stimulate curiosity, and thereby, and I'm just thinking aloud here, I feel that going outdoors, exploring what you want to do, let them not worry about whether this will go wrong or right. Some of those little things probably help you, because that's what science is all about, right?
Right. I totally agree. I think that it's so important to have a holistic education, especially in like formative years, and to have that in a way that is completely unbiased, so that at the end of it, children can choose what they want to do. And if they want to do it all, they still can do that.
From what I know, Arushi, your interest goes beyond just science. You sing, you play. What else do you do?
I used to run in high school. So I used to competitively run, and I used to enjoy history a lot. I like reading a lot. And I think all of that does help me. I don't really think of myself as a one-dimensional person. And I think all those interests help me, I guess, balance out my thought process. Or I think they just make my perspective on things a little more holistic.
Do you still continue your passion for reading?
I do.
Any favorite authors? Any specific genre of books you like to read? Or is it just fiction, non-fiction?
Sure. So I mostly like fiction. I like a lot of high fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite author is Brandon Sanderson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Great. Arushi, thank you so much for your time. I think I've learned a lot of interesting things. And I think yours is an amazing story. I wish you nothing but the very best for your future. Um, Anything else you want to share with our audience, uh, especially young girls who want to pursue STEM?
I think that it's nice to have role models to look to. I think that helped me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Women, like girls that were just a few years older than me. Um, I think that it's important to stand your ground sometimes. That's something I'm still learning. Um,
What do you mean by that?
Again, I think this goes back to like what I said about being assertive.
Hmm.
So a lot of times when people speak over me, um, I have this thing where I have to be like 200, 300% sure about something to like even open my mouth on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people like speak with like much less, I guess, confidence or not confidence, assurance.
Hmm.
And so I think that I shouldn't second guess myself as much.
And I think I really liked what you said about look for inspiring figures. And you may not necessarily need to look back into history books. I think we can find inspiration all around us. It could be anyone. I draw a lot of inspiration around my house help who comes home and she's raising her 3 kids. She's making sure that they are going to school, they're pursuing their passion. And that also could be an inspiration, right? It's not necessarily the ones who've always got a Nobel Prize or who are a corporate leader.
Yeah, that's so true.
All right. Thank you, Aarushi, once again. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And wishing you all the very best.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Between Us podcast. This podcast was recorded at Manikpod Studios in Chembur, Mumbai. Our sound engineer is Mainak Chakraborty, and your producers are Arnav Dogra and Santosh Kumar. The Between Us podcast uploads episodes weekly, and we'll see you next time.